Hello, and thank you for joining us for another Latino Coalition webinar. I'm your host, Danny Vargas, National DC Director for the Latino Coalition. Don't forget to watch our other webinars and our podcast series, and stay tuned for more important upcoming events like our upcoming Latina Prosperity Summit in Miami in October. You won't want to miss that. We are so thankful for your support, and we hope to educate, inspire, and guide all business owners, entrepreneurs, and members of the Latino Coalition with our webinars. We really want to thank our sponsor, Wells Fargo, for their support and helping to make this series possible. Keep checking back for more information, more content, and please join us. Now, let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Mark Kirsch. Mark Kirsch is a partner at Lathrop GPM, based in the firm's Washington, D.C. office. With over 35 years of experience in franchise and distribution law, he focuses his practice on domestic and international franchising, licensing, and distribution matters, including transactional and regulatory matters, and mergers and acquisitions. Mark's clients range from large national and international chains to emerging systems across a wide range of industries. Mark served as chair of the International Franchise Association Supplier Forum and was a member of the IFA's board of directors. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you take it away and show us your presentation?
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the Latino Coalition inviting me to talk about franchising. As you can see, the title is Franchising. This is going to be an introduction. There's so much in the topic of franchising that we can't cover it in 30 or 40 minutes. It could be an entire semester of a law school class, a business school class, etc. But let's see if we can scratch the surface and hopefully answer some of your questions, and then maybe trigger some additional discussion and research and going into business as a franchisor or a franchisee. All right, so what we want to do today is talk about four things. One, what is the impact of franchising in the United States? We're going to give you just a high-level view, but what I think you'll see is that franchising, it's much more broad and diverse than what you might think about as typical fast food chains. Next thing is to talk about what is franchising? What is this business method that people talk about franchising? How does it affect business owners? How does it affect investors and people who want to be a business owner? And how does it affect people who are already in business and may want to expand through franchising? The next two topics will be, if you are thinking about being a business owner, what does it mean to become a franchisee? And how do you become a franchisee? And the last thing is, how do you become a franchisor? So the first thing is the impact of franchising in the United States and in diverse communities. When I say franchising, most people think about brands just like these on the screen, what I call traditional franchises. Businesses that have been around for decades. I mean, A&W Root Beer was franchising in the 1920s and 30s. But a typical, fast food or quick service restaurant, maybe a hotel or a rental-car company. But what we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years is a real explosion in the growth of franchising, in various business format franchises, in all sorts of industries. Here are just some, 5 examples of logos. A lot of them are in the service industries, healthcare, outdoor and home services, entertainment services. Pods is a storage business. So it's just been a huge explosion. And what you'll see is that there are probably over 3,500 different brands across the United States. Some are national, you've heard of them. Some are regional, some are local, but they're out there. Just to give you a sense, franchising spans over 100 industries. And just take a look at this list, and I think it's about a couple of dozen. And you'll see it ranges from business services to home services to retail, obviously different sorts of restaurants, service industries that are fixed-based service industries that are mobile. So what you'll find is that franchising really covers a wide range of industries throughout the country. Just another small piece of this, franchise outlets by sector. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner of the pie chart, There's your typical franchises, quick service restaurants. Only about a quarter of the country, a quarter of the survey or the number of outlets are quick service restaurants. But you've got hotels, personal services, real estate brands, et cetera. And just kind of, a much broader view of the US economy, there are, as you can see, over or almost 800,000 franchise outlets or franchise businesses in this country that employ over 8 million workers and generate $787 billion in sales and revenue. So as you can see, it's a major sector of our economy. Now, what does franchising mean for diverse franchisees? The International Franchise Association, or the IFA, and Danny mentioned that at the outset, that's the largest franchise organization, business association of franchising in the country and frankly in the world. And the IFA represents franchisors, franchisees, and suppliers or vendors to the franchise industry. Last year, they did they commissioned an economic study, and these are some of the results from that. As you can see, 26% of franchises are owned by people of color, compared to 17% of non-franchise independent businesses owned by people of color. And what's interesting, these statistics hold across all industries. A lot of those industries that I just showed you on that slide. Turning to a subset of Hispanic-owned franchise businesses, what the report showed is that Hispanic-owned franchise businesses generate 1.6 times the amount of revenue or sales as a Hispanic-owned non-franchise business. These two other statistics that I included here on the slide are kind of interesting for anybody, that a lot of people who go into business, they go into a franchise more likely than they would go into their own business. And there's some reasons for that, which we're going to touch on, primarily that you're going to have some help and some assistance and some brand name recognition by becoming a franchisee and not simply starting your own business. And the last statistic here is really interesting. 70% of franchise owners purchase a franchise outside of their area of expertise. So just because you are a teacher, or I'm a lawyer, or you're a marketing executive in a company, doesn't mean you have to stick to that narrow lane. There, you can go into a business that you are not that familiar with, as long as you have the right skills, etc. So that was a very quick overview of franchising in the economy. But what is franchising? Well, franchising is a creature of contracts and a creature of the law. What do I mean by that? A franchise exists when there is a relationship between two parties, a contract, if you will. And you can see the three elements, but let me just hit them briefly for you. So the first thing is, if the brand owner, and let's use the ubiquitous McDonald's, if the brand owner McDonald's grants a license, I'll go upstream, downstream to the franchisee or to the operator. You have a trademark license to use the McDonald's mark. Second, does the brand owner exercise a certain level of control or provide a certain level of assistance to the operator? And that control can be over products, territory, operating standards. Assistance can include training, advertising, etc. So if you have a control or assistance, that's the second element. The third element is the payment of a fee. And that is the operator pays a fee upstream to the brand owner. That fee can be an initial fee to get into the business, what's called an initial franchise fee. It can be a royalty fee, an advertising fee, or some other fee. So if you have a trademark license, control or assistance, or payment of a fee, you've got the three elements of a franchise. In the US, there are generally two major types of franchises, and this is described here: single unit and multi-unit franchises. The names pretty much describe them. But a single unit franchise is when a franchisor decides it will offer franchises on a one-off basis, one to Mr. Smith, one to Ms. Jones, etc., throughout the country. A multiple unit franchise is when the franchisor is willing to grant larger territories and rights to someone. Usually it's someone who has a little bit more capital, more experience, etc. And they grant them the right to develop, say, 3 or 10 or 15 of that brand's unit within a particular geographic area, maybe a county. And then there's a schedule that the franchisee must develop those. That's what's called area development. There's also something called master franchising. It's pretty much used internationally, not so much in the US, where the master franchisee essentially steps into the shoes of the franchisor and grants sub-franchises to individual franchisees in that territory. Things that may or may not be franchises are dealers and distributors, and also licenses. It really depends on how they're structured. And that's actually a topic for another conversation, because it goes into a lot more detail. This is not a law class, although I'm a lawyer, but I do have to mention laws governing franchises. So there's 2 sets of laws, or 2 levels of laws that affect franchising in the United States: federal level and the state level. At the federal level, you have the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission's franchise rule. What this says is that before anyone offers a franchise to anybody in the United States, they must provide a franchise disclosure document, or FDD, to this prospective franchisee. It is a disclosure-only regime. That means the franchisor only has to provide disclosure. There's no registration. Nothing gets filed with the FTC or any other federal agency. Nothing gets reviewed by the FTC. But what this FDD does, it explains in a lot of aspects of the franchise business. For example, it will include the history of the franchisor, its officers, directors, litigation history. There's a summary of the fees paid to the franchisor. There's also a summary of the initial investment, the cost to get into the business, not just payments to the franchisor, but also payments to third parties. There's information about trademarks and other support. There's a list of all the franchisees in the system. And the FDD also includes a copy of the franchisor's financial statements and the franchise agreement and other agreements. It's a big, thick document. Anyway, at the state level, there are 14 states that have said, that's not good enough for us. Before you offer or sell a franchise in my state, you have to take that FDD, modify it or tweak it according with our state law and regulation, send it to one of our state agencies. We get to review it, tweak it a bit more. Then, if we say, okay, you're approved, you're registered, then you can offer and sell franchises in our state. There's another group of state laws called business opportunity laws. It's a similar registration and disclosure regime. These are really designed for smaller businesses, vending machine routes, rack jobbing, work at home businesses. They sometimes overlap with franchising, but I just want to let you know about them. The third level of law at the state level is the franchise relationship laws. The other things I talked about were protecting a prospective franchisee before he or she buys a franchise. The relationship laws in about 22 states say that we want to protect franchisees from unfair practices of franchisors. So a franchisor can't terminate without good cause, or without providing notice and opportunity to cure, or can't unfairly or unreasonably deny a consent to a transfer. So for now, that's enough on the legal side. So what are the advantages of franchising? Well, for franchisors, one big advantage is that you're expanding using someone else's money. If you owned a business, a retail store, a restaurant, and you wanted to open a second one, well, you could use your cash flow or borrow money. You can open a second or a third or a fourth. Here with franchising, you're opening additional outlets using, if you will, someone else's money, the franchisee's money. It's not really your outlet. That's the key here. It's the franchisee's outlet, it's the franchisee's store, it's the franchisee's restaurant. But they are investing their capital and it's expanding your brand. Another benefit to franchisors is generally businesses run better when the owner is involved, and they run more efficiently than just having an employee manager. It's not always the case, and I mean no disrespect to any manager of any business, but what they've seen over time is that, you know, an owner operator will operate more profitably. For a franchisee, there's a classic statement: you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. You heard me mention about, you know, controls, but also assistance, training, advertising. You have the franchisor support. You may get into a franchise where you have established brand recognition, but you may be in a franchise where it's more of a startup and you're kind of establishing it. There's another benefit to being a franchisee that's really not talked about extensively, and that is cost of products, cost of inventory, equipment, supplies, etc. Every business needs to pay for them, but sometimes, or most often in a franchise system, you're going to get the volume discount or volume purchasing discounts that the franchisor will get. The franchisor is able to collect all of its purchases for its franchisees and get a lower price, which is something you may not get as an individual owner. You know, everything is, you know, not rainbows and roses. There are some disadvantages of franchises. If you're a franchisee, you are not completely independent. You have to follow the rules and systems and standards of the franchisor. And you're going to have to pay fees. I mentioned royalty fees, and you know, royalty fees are the ongoing payment that, you know, you pay to the franchisor for the ongoing use of the mark and assistance. You know, and there are other fees that you would pay to the franchisor. A third point here is that your business can be damaged by someone else's actions. So if a franchisee is down the street or across town, is not operating in accordance with standards, or has a dirty store, that can actually adversely impact you, and it could impact the franchisor. So there's, you know, there are things that you're not in complete control. You're probably going to say, how much does a franchise cost? Well, the short answer is it depends. So what I put up here are several different categories. So the first three are categories that a franchisee or prospective franchisee pays to the franchisor. I mentioned the initial fee. You know, can range from 25 to 50,000. Could be more, could be less, but that's probably a good range. The royalties and other payments that the franchisee pays to the franchisor, you know, 3%, 5%, 6% of gross sales. It's gross sales, not just, you know, net sales to the franchisor. Franchisors also have, or most often have, a national or system-wide brand fund or marketing fund. And so franchisees will contribute to that, which is then used for media purchases as well as advertising creation and things of that nature. There's also local expenditures, but that's really what the franchisee pays locally, what he or she should do in an independent business. There's a whole lot of other costs, and I mentioned this earlier. These are, you know, startup costs that you would have whether you were opening a brand name business or your own business. You know, if I wanted to open, you know, Mark's, you know, smoothies and sandwiches, I'd still have to pay rent and build out and furniture, fixtures, equipment, etc. But if I bought if I bought a franchise for the same sort of concept, I would be making those payments not to the franchisor, but, you know, to a third party. So in total, how much does it cost? Some of them are $100,000, some are over $1 million. It really depends on the concept. And you can think about it that if you don't have a lot of initial outlay, you know, maybe a mobile distribution or mobile service business doesn't have a lot other than the truck and the equipment in a small office, whereas a quick service restaurant with a drive-through is going to be over $1 million. So you want to start as a franchisee, what do you do? Well, I won't say an endless number of things to do, but there's a lot. But the first thing is to look and understand, is there a difference between a franchisee and an entrepreneur? And the answer is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no. Both of them are independent operators. Both of them have their own business. An entrepreneur may have a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more freedom than a franchisee. The franchisee really should be able to accept coaching and follow standards. But you're still in business for yourself. The next thing that I would recommend is doing what I call a preliminary self-assessment. What is it that I really want to do? Just because I like food, does that mean I really want to run a restaurant? Do I really want to, deal with all of the back office, kitchen, employment issues that, that a restaurant has? And so do I have what it takes to start my own business? Is this the sort of lifestyle I want to handle, or I want to live in? I mean, many of us work, I don't know anyone really works 9 to 5 anymore, but 8 to 5, 8 to 6, whatever. But you own a business. If it's not 24/7, it's clearly on your mind 24/7, and you're going to be working different types of hours and different business concepts and different operations. And so do you have what it takes to be a franchisee? And the last thing is evaluating franchise opportunities, lining them up, comparing, do I want to be in retail? Do I want to be in service? I want to be in service. What kind of service do I want to be in? Do I have the right skills? If I don't have the right skills, can I learn those skills? And then looking at the various brands. One thing is, I mentioned these FDDs, they are available publicly, not easily publicly, but they're available. You could line up FDDs and just compare franchises from brand to brand to brand in the same industry or different industries. Does this brand have the training that you need? Does it have the support that you want? Is there a market demand, or are you kind of going to be the guinea pig for that brand? There's a lot of issues like that. Clearly, financing is an issue. What I've identified here are common financing problems that you might find in any business, also in franchising. Lack of equity, lack of cash flow. When I say inadequate management skills or business background, I don't mean to point the finger and say, no, you're not good enough. But you need to demonstrate, if you're going to borrow money, particularly from a bank or other lending source, that you've got what it takes for them to invest their money and take a risk with you. Many startup franchisees will borrow money either from banks, from the SBA, which is really a loan guarantee, and from friends and family. But there's there's also other ways to do it, from savings. Some people, there's actually some programs that you can take money out of your 401k. Again, there's a lot more behind all of this, but financing is a big issue. And you want to have sufficient capital, particularly in the first 6 months, a year, 2 years, to get through the rough startup time of any new business. So as a franchisee, how are you going to be successful? Well, a lot of it is you, and some of it's the franchisor. You want to follow the franchise system. You really want to, accept that the franchisor knows best. I hate to say it that way, or they think they know the best way, and you can't be too much of a maverick out there. You want to stay enthusiastic about your business. You want to hire and retain good people. And I know in this market, it is the hardest thing to do, but that's so critical because, that's the lifeblood of your business. The other thing is get involved in the community. Even though you may be part of a national brand or a regional brand, you're still a local independent business owner. And customers like that. And you got to remind them, because most people don't think of franchising as a local business. They think of it as a national brand. And that's part of what the franchise community needs to do, is make sure that people understand Franchisees are independent local businesses. And lastly, stay responsive to your family needs. I can't emphasize that enough, because it has nothing to do with law, it has nothing to do with business, but it has everything to do with how you operate on a day-to-day basis. So shifting gears, if you will, or shifting perspectives, let's assume you have your own business, restaurant, retail, service business, and you say, I'd like to expand. What do you need to do to expand using franchising? Well, the first thing is you have to be prepared to franchise. And what do I mean by that? I say you have to have a sound concept and be ready to franchise. But if you've got one outlet, you need to convince someone that they can operate the same brand just as well as you can. So maybe what you need to do is not just have one outlet or one business, but a second, a third, maybe a fourth, maybe in different locations, maybe different footprints, clearly to work out the kinks of operating in multiple locations. The next thing is you're asking someone to pay you money to get into business, to be trained by you, to get your assistance, and you're essentially promising them, not legally, but you're saying to them, you're going to make money here. And so you have to deliver on that stated or unstated promise, and you want to be able to provide value. Otherwise, franchisee or the person can just open their own business. I also mentioned complying with legal requirements. It's not because I'm a lawyer, but I have seen many franchisees and franchisors fail or stub their toe or have a problem because they're cutting corners. The other thing is growing with the right people in the right places. And I realize this is kind of a generalization, but you are going from an operator of one or multiple businesses to a manager and administrator of other people's businesses. So you have to have the right team with the right skill set. And you're going to need to have additional trainers, real estate and site selection, purchasing, franchise development or franchise sales. Maybe there are people in your organization who can do that, but maybe you need to get other people, bring them in or outsource some of that. And as I say here, the quality of your franchisees is so critical. You don't want to sell a franchise to the first person who walks in the door with a check or, someone who can fog a mirror. You really want to get a good, solid, qualified person to be your first franchisee and your second franchisee and your third franchisee. And you want to give them the support they need, because if they are successful, they will become your best ambassadors for growth. Other things about being a franchisor, effective field service and support. You've got franchisees out in, regionally or across the country. You need to support them. You need to be out there in their stores with them, helping them navigate some of their local challenges and some of their business challenges. Another thing that a franchisor can do is data analytics. I mean, every business can and should determine what their costs are and what their inputs are and which products are selling well and maybe which products sold well because of this advertising campaign, etc. But with a franchisor and a franchise system, what you have is the ability to aggregate all of this information from all your franchisees, bring it in, slice it, dice it, and send it back to your franchisees. So let them know what the rest of the system is doing and how they can improve based on the other franchisees. And of course, you need to be on top of things with new products and services, because that's what a business needs to do to stay ahead of their competition, which is the next point, and that is expect and manage change. Things change. Your franchisees will have an agreement that runs for maybe 10 years with two 10-year options. After that, there'll be competition. They want to be with you. They want to grow, and you have to be responsive to changes internally as well as externally, new technologies, new systems, new methods of operation. And lastly, what I would say is you want to be fair to your franchisees. We don't use the term partner when we talk about a franchisee and a franchisor because it's got a legal connotation. But as a practical matter, franchisees are your partners in developing the brand, in growing the brand. If they're successful, you're going to be successful. Now, what I've done, and I've come to the end of my, if you will, my prepared remarks, as you probably see, there's a whole lot more that we could discuss. You know, whether it's the legal side or the operations side or the finance side, but hopefully what we've given you is an introduction to franchising. I know I want to open it up for, I think Danny has some questions, but before I do that, Danny, let me just skip ahead for 1 second. Our law firm, about a year and a half ago, started an increasing diversity in franchising program. And we've developed this webinar series. And as you can see here, we've done a handful of them. We're going to do some more. And I invite you to go onto our website, and you can look at some of these that are that we already. If you click on the link, there'll be a recording, and sign up for additional webinars, and we're happy to you can join us. Lastly, I want to just leave this up for a second. Franchise resources. There's a lot. Hopefully you'll have questions. The International Franchise Association has a great library, online library of resources. You can also talk to your local SBDCs and chambers of commerce. They will have information about franchising. The other thing is, if there's an industry you're interested in, talk to those go to those industry association websites. They may not talk about franchising, but what they will have is information about that particular industry and how it operates and suppliers, etc. The other thing is talk to franchisees. I mean, you could walk into your local smoothie shop or your local, retail store. You can find out if they're franchised, and talk to the manager. Or more likely, talk to the franchisee and understand it about the business. There are also franchise trade shows. The International Franchise Expo is in New York every June. There is something called the West Coast Franchise Expo and Franchise Expo South and other ones. If there's some in your community, go. I think it's maybe say $20 to go, and you walk around and it's on the convention floor, and you can meet prospective franchisors and see what they're offering and learn about their businesses. The caveat I have is they're really a sales tool there. So just be careful. Use it as an information gathering. So Danny, let me stop there and open up for whatever questions you have.
Mark, thank you so much. I do have some questions for you, but before I start with any questions, I just want to say thank you for sharing all that really important information with our audience. There is one question that comes to mind, though, and I think I may have mentioned this to you before. We've got a lot of members who are current existing business owners that maybe have had their business for a few years, but maybe they're thinking about making a change and becoming a franchisee. And in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to keep your responses fairly pithy. But have you seen those examples where an entrepreneur who's had a business decides to just change tracks and become a franchisee?
Yes, I have. And so what if you're in a business, you like the business, but you want to associate with another brand? You can do that. And there are franchise brands that are willing to take what we call conversion franchises. And so you take your business and you convert, from Danny's Donuts to Dunkin' Donuts, if you will. And you have to go through the same, franchise disclosure process, agreements, etc. But it's definitely a way to go.
Now, so I've been in business myself for the last 18 years. I know that one of the first things that I did was to get an accountant and to get a lawyer. So I assume that also holds true for franchising. Does a person considering becoming a franchisee need to get a lawyer?
Absolutely. I highly recommend it, and not because I'm a lawyer. You really need to have the right advice. You need advisors. I agree with the accountant and I agree with the lawyer. Now, if you're going to go into franchising, what you really should have is a lawyer who understands franchising. And there are a lot of them out there. Some of them tend to represent only franchisees, and some represent only franchisors, and some represent both, because you really have to understand the business dynamic and the legal dynamic. And you may have, your brother-in-law may be a great lawyer, or you may have a wonderful relationship with your real estate lawyer, or your labor lawyer, but he or she may not have the right experience. And so you really have to put together your own advisory team.
Well, and one of the things you mentioned during your presentation was competition, right? So it's one thing to compete if you've got a smoothie shop. It's one thing to compete with other smoothie shops of different brands, but it's even more contentious, I guess, to compete within your own brand where you franchised. So if you become a franchisee, typically do you have some kind of exclusivity or protection in terms of territory or other mechanisms by which you're not going to be self-poaching within the same brand?
Yes, almost every brand, when they grant a franchise, will grant the franchisee some protected or exclusive territory in which the franchisor promises not to establish another unit, another outlet of that same brand, franchised or company owned, in that territory. I mean, there are a few, McDonald's doesn't, but let's put aside that. I mean, most every brand will do that. And again, this is where a lawyer is real important, because a franchisor, and I represent franchisors, they write these contracts, very precisely. There's a grant of a territory, but there's also reservation of rights. And let me just give you an example. Again, the ice cream franchise, they won't put another brand X in your territory, but they reserve the right to sell prepackaged ice cream at the grocery store, which could be in the same shopping mall as you. It's nothing wrong, it's nothing illegal, but it's understanding what your rights are and what your rights are not.
That's really good to know. The reason I mentioned the smoothie shop example is because my son last summer worked at a smoothie shop, so I'm familiar with that sort of industry. But if I like the concept of a smoothie shop, is there a way for me to be able to sort of try out, see if it's right for me as a franchisee before diving in, or once I'm in, I'm in?
I mean, generally speaking, once you're in, you're in. The best way to test it out is to look at a number of brands in that industry, get the FDDs, talk to the franchisors, talk to prospective franchisees. Then you get a sense. There may be some brands where if they will allow you to, I won't say cooperate, but co-manage and work with a franchisee in a particular location and see how it really operates. But generally speaking, you're not going to be able to kind of test drive, okay, I'm going to be an owner for a year and then get rid of it. So, but it's more doing your diligence, and if you have the time and the commitment and the money to kind of work somewhere else and learn that business, you can do it.
That's good to know. So as I mentioned, I've had my business for the last 18 years. I've had a lawyer that I've used for a very long time, but that's as an entrepreneur, right? So, and I'm familiar with the liability that's associated with my business. Is there a benefit or a disadvantage from a liability standpoint of being a franchisee versus being an entrepreneur in terms of, what the liability might be for lawsuits and so forth?
I would say no. I mean, and there's also the franchisor side of this. By and large, the issues that you're going to encounter as an independent business owner are going to be the same as an independent franchisee. So, I mean, you may hear, oh, there's litigation in franchising. Yeah, but there's litigation in every industry. So I would say no. At the franchisor level, do franchisors have, is it more risky? In some respect, it is, in the sense that you're now you've got this other layer of regulation to comply with. I mean, right now you're already, let's assume you're an oil change business, you're complying with the local and national rules for oil change businesses and labor, et cetera. Now you start granting franchising. So in that situation, you've got this franchise regulation, and then you have franchisees who may not be happy with you at some point, and they may sue you because they think you're doing a bad job or you breached the contract, et cetera. So at the franchisor level, there might be more litigation than you might have if you weren't a franchisor and just operating, growing organically through company-owned units. But again, I think it's more what you read in the paper or something, if anyone reads papers, what you see in the press. It's not significantly more. And like anything else, you can pretty much manage your liability risk.
So that brings me to, I think, the final question. Is it, if you've got a business and you've got one location, maybe two, and people keep coming to you and saying, wow, this is a great business, why don't you start thinking about franchising it out and so forth? But you're concerned about some of the things that you just described. Is there a way to create sort of a mini franchisor type situation, franchise light, if you will, without having to go through all of the rigmarole and jump through all the hoops?
There is the possibility of doing that, okay? But you have to do it carefully. First of all, you got to make sure, who is this person that says, I want to be your franchisee? I mean, maybe it's your sister-in-law, okay, and maybe you trust her. But the next issue is, are you granting a franchise even if you don't want to? You can call the license, you can call an affiliation agreement. I mean, I use this example all the time. I tell clients, it doesn't matter the title at the top of the contract. If it's got the three elements of a franchise, it's franchise. You can call it an elephant. So there are ways to do it. And it really goes through certain exemptions under the franchise laws. So if you're in a state that doesn't have a franchise law, that's a good thing. And the person is not in a state with a franchise law. And then you're able to satisfy certain exemptions from the FTC rule. You may be able to structure a relationship that is not a franchise or meets the exemptions, and so you don't have to do an FDD. But at the end of the day, what's most important is creating that solid business relationship between you, the owner, and whoever the operator is, and have it memorialized in a contract. Hopefully, at the end of the day, you put that contract in a drawer and no one looks at it. But you have to, make sure that you're doing what you say you're going to do, and they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And then we make sure that we're not crossing any sort of franchise line, so you're not violating franchise law.
Great information, Mark. Listen, if folks want to get a hold of you, would you be willing to share your contact information?
Oh, yes. I think I have that at the very end. So I'm happy to. And I just want to say thank you very much for having me and for allowing me to, talk about this. As you can probably tell, I'm passionate about this. I've been doing this for over 35 years. So, but thank you. And thank you, Danny, for hosting this and your questions.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And being in DC, I'm sure we'll run into each other in the not too distant future. Thank you again. And Mark's contact information is on the screen. I do want to take a moment to thank Mark so very much for sharing with us this incredibly important information on franchising. This webinar has been incredibly informative and helpful. And I hope all of our business owners, entrepreneurs, and members in the audience have taken away some valuable information from this webinar and this presentation. And on behalf of the Latino Coalition, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the content. Please join us for future webinars and podcasts. And please keep an eye out for information on our upcoming Latina Prosperity Summit. Thank you once again, Mark, for being our guest speaker today. Thank you all for joining us. And as always, be safe, aim high, and thrive. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time. Hasta pronto.
Bye-bye.